Yep. Always do that.
Jessica, you feel good?
Yeah, I feel great. Thank you.
Okay.
You can tell us when everyone is in, so we
They're
don't
working
start
now.
without someone. I keep looking over here because I have a big monitor I can see. These little squares are hard for us elders to see.
Welcome, everybody. We're just letting some folks in. We'll start in just a second here. Whenever you're ready.
No, hold on, I have to open my door for the other side.
Again, welcome everyone. Welcome to Multicultural Mosaic Foundation's speaker series program tonight with Representative-elect Iman Joda. Tonight's program will be as follows. I will be saying a few words.
All right, it looks like we have everyone in now. Perfect. All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to have you all here for today's 350 Denver's panel on Indigenous environmental justice. And before we begin, we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement and a prayer. So Dr. Maria Michael, if you would please share a prayer with us today. You're on mute. Let me try to unmute here.
I got it. We wanted to say good evening, and before we start this prayer, we send a heartfelt handshake around the whole circle to each and every one of you and say welcome. I'm going to speak a little bit in my native language, but we'll explain it in English as well. Take my glasses off for the prayer. Tonkashila, grandfathers, Unshi, grandmothers, Unshi Maka, grandmother earth, Mini Wichoni, sacred water. We ask all the elements of air and light, all the creepy crawlers, all the ones that swim in the water, all the four-leggeds, all the winged ones, all the two-leggeds. We ask that you all join us, all the Tonka Ayate, the stone nation, all the Petawaka, the sacred fires and the sacred fires that burn within us. We say, Wapilatanka, thank you for this opportunity to be all together on this night, on this day. Our first Wapilatanka, big thank you, Tonkashla grandfathers and grandmothers. We say thank you for letting each one of us have this day to be alive, to have this day, to have a full day to be of service. And we thank you for letting us open our eyes on this day. We ask for special prayers for all those who are suffering at this moment. All those who are sick, all those families that are in mourning, all the people on all the reservations everywhere where the pandemic is frightening and is taking so many lives. We say, please go to each and every one of those people everywhere in this country and around the world. Go to everyone who is alone on this night. All the frontline, all the people who are in EMS, all the people working in the hospitals. Help all of them. Everyone is in pain. Everybody is frightened. We ask that you give them some sense of peace. Let them know that you're watching. Let them know that they're not alone. We want to say Wopilatanka to all the nations that have walked across this land of Colorado, to the Arapaho, to the Comanche, to the Kiowa, to the Mashika, to the Lakota, to the Diné, and to so many other traditions and peoples. We ask you to bless the ancestors of this land and thank them for letting us be here on this land and letting them know that we are all here to respect them and all their wisdom and all their knowledge that is in the land still, and all their wishes and prayers that are still here as well. We say Wopilatanka Tonkashla Unshi. We say Unshi Maka, each person that's on this call and the people who will be on the call in the future if this is being recorded. May they understand the importance of how limitless your love has been to give each and every one of us food and water and shelter. We say to you, thank you, Wopila. We say thank you, Pilamaye, for giving us the chance to live and to walk on your back, to drink your water, to eat your food. And many of us on this call have taken this vow to protect you and keep you safe, and not to pollute you, not to take advantage of you, but to instead help begin to clean up the mess the two-leggeds have made while living on your back. We say, Wopilatanka, thank you, Unshimaka, Grandmother Earth, for all the ways that you take care of us and all the ways you will take care of us and the next 49 generations in the future. We say thank you for this chance to be together, all together in this way, in a good way, that we all come together from a place of a good heart with one mind and one heartbeat, and help us to create the change that is needed so that we can shift this world from one of power and greed to one of peace and prayer and love. Again, we say Wopilatanka to all, not only the ancestors of this land, but all of your ancestors, because it will take a council gathering of all the ancestors to create the change that's needed. We must become one sacred family of all living beings, or we cannot change what needs to be changed. We have to come together in a circle, all of us. So we say, Wopilatanka, thank you for this chance to pray. Washte, and Mitakuase, we are all related. Aho, Mitakiape.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful. I guess that's a great way to start and introduce all of our wonderful panelists. So offering such a lovely prayer is Dr. Maria Michael. She is a renowned medical intuitive, a channel, an empath, healer, psychic, and teacher for over 40 years. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, she's been coordinating donations to ensure that people on the Dene and Hopi reservations have access to the needed resources. She's a Lakota Dene Navajo traditional elder and is on our 350 Colorado Board of Directors. And did I miss anything from all the wonderful things that you do?
Good enough.
Okay, perfect. And then we also have Renee Millard-Chacon. She is a writer, a cultural educator, a teacher, an Aztecan dancer, a Chicana activist, and a mother. She works with Spirit of the Sun, International Indigenous Youth Council, Four Winds American Indian Council of Denver, and is co-founder with her cousin, Micaela Shell-Dominguez, also on this call, of Women from the Mountain. Renee has also worked with 350 Colorado to address how women and children are often trafficked in fossil fuel development areas.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to share anything else, Renee?
Ometo, thank you for this opportunity to talk, and thank you for hosting. Ometo.
Thank you. And then last but certainly not least is Micaela Shell-Dominguez. She is a Lakota and Chicana, born and raised here in Denver. She is the vice chair, board mentor, and adult mentor for the International Indigenous Youth Council, co-founder of the Women from the Mountain, and the social justice empowerment coordinator of Spirit of the Sun. And she is also now our new 350 Denver team coordinator. We're so lucky to have her on our team. Micaela, would you like to share anything else to get started?
Yes, to be blessed and honored to be here with three beautiful women on this panel. So thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, so to proceed, first we'll start with 6 different questions that I've started out with. I'll pose that to the different panelists. They'll all have a few minutes to answer and then ask any follow-up questions to each other if they have any. During this first moderated section, if you're an audience member, please keep yourself on mute. And if you have any questions, you can include them in the chat below. At the end, we'll open up to the whole community for a question and answer section. Cool. All right. So my first question is, well, last month was the National Native American Heritage Month, which is a dedicated time to celebrate the many cultures and traditions, histories, and contributions of Indigenous people, as well as to continue to bring light to the historic and present day challenges Native people face. Last month was also a month that houses Thanksgiving, a day that signifies to many a time for families to come together in gratitude, but it's also a day that signifies colonialism, land dispossession, and mass genocide of Indigenous peoples. The continued legacy of colonialism, continued violations of treaty rights, land rights, water rights, and degradation of critical natural resources has put many Indigenous communities at the front line of climate change, as well as on the fence line of resource extracting and highly polluting industries. Tribal communities' experience of environmental injustice is unique because of their political sovereignty, their unique relationship to the land, and the continued legacy of settler colonialism. So my first question is, could you please share more about Indigenous environmental injustice and how environmental degradation impacts health, way of life, sense of community, connection to land, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being, and what are some unique challenges that the Dene, Hopi, and Lakota people face as it relates to environmental justice?
Ladies, who would like to go?
I could just, want me to go and pass it?
You can.
Just briefly, I just want to state that for my people, the Lakota people, there is a deep history of environmental racism. And one of the most devastating examples for us is the government encouraged and sanctioned the slaughter of the buffalo population, reducing it from 30 million to 20,000 to 25,000 today. This campaign of environmental devastation was motivated by a desire to starve my people. My people did not just use the buffalo to eat and use, but we used like every single part. There was a photo that I wanted to share, but it's okay. But we did use every single part of the buffalo from its from its head all the way down to their hooves. And then of course racism did not obviously end after Wounded Knee in 1890. It was carried all the way through the 20th century and all the way up till today. Remember, wear something else, right? Renee and Dr. Maria Michael. Most of you probably heard of Standing Rock, which is the Indigenous uprising of 2016, in which peaceful protesters protecting the Cannonball, Missouri rivers against the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline were sprayed with water canyons in freezing temperatures, attacked by dogs, beaten, and violently arrested. And all of this because we refused to let an oil pipeline come through what little land we have left on our poisoned soil. And sisters, if you guys just want to go from there and continue, what else?
Renee, do you want to speak?
Thank you. Momento. That's such a loaded question.
Oh, yeah.
When I first read it, I was like, I live in Commerce City. It's known as the armpit of Colorado. Colorado has since its founding, which wasn't just the Treaty of Fort Laramie, but 7 treaties that is stolen land that we sit on of the Cheyenne and Ute and the Arapaho people, that has perpetuated the environmental racism and degradation that has been since Columbus and since settlers came here. So let's be real. That being said, Colorado has a habit of choking and flushing out BIPOC people with policies of redlining and environmental racism ever since. Areas of Aurora, Swansea, Commerce City, Brighton, and so many spaces around are already so toxic on every particle pollutant you could possibly think of, that we all suffer for intergenerational traumas of not only having to deal with literally the physical particulate pollution of anemia, of nosebleeds, of more contributions to COVID deaths now, even more than ever. But we also have to deal with the cost that is of no healthcare. We have to deal with no affordable housing. And then we're invisible here as well. When you say injustices, I think automatically Sand Creek Massacre. That is known here in Colorado, and if you are Indigenous, that rings in a very bad way. And yet that moniker is perpetuated all over Colorado with no real visibility of Indigenous representation. So not only are we invisible to the American identity constantly, where we're called something else, so we're still dehumanized, but we're constantly trafficked, both labor trafficking, human trafficking, and sex trafficking. We're still exploited on our actual, what you call resources, our sources of life. And then we're continued to be flushed out when we're no longer useful. So that's the harmful effects of a lot of Indigenous communities, both urban that try to live urban, and then BIPOC communities when we try to actually stay here. And I can only speak sometimes for the Colorado spaces because I'm more localized data in this space, but I guarantee it's every space over and over of the same predatory capitalism on specifically our sources of life.
Okay, so we have lived on both coasts. We have lived in South Dakota. We've been at Standing Rock for 5 months when the uprising was there. We have been part of AIM. We are also an Indigenous spiritual leader. We have also a Sundance leader of 30 years. So we're a traditional person, and it's that problem exists that Renee is talking about and that Micaela is talking about is everywhere. It is not just Colorado. And the spirits told us to start, because I'm Lakota and Diné, you know Diné as Navajo, but you know, there was a time when the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota were called the Sioux Nation. And that's because the French that came through where they were camped by a river that was very snaky, they used a French language to say those people are the Sioux means snake in French. So as Indigenous people, we call ourselves Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. And the Navajo call themselves Diné to mean the people. So each nation uses different words. And what's important to understand is that all the people, whether they be on the reservation or whether they be off the reservation, we want to talk to something Renee brought up, is, you know, even during this election, we were never spoken about. We were the forgotten people. When they had signs on MSNBC and CNN about the Black vote, the Asian vote, the Latino vote, and then there was something else, literally the word something else. And I can't tell you how fast that went around among all the Indigenous people. We're the something else still. And so one of the things that's really important to understand that in all the traditions, no matter from which direction, they're all based with Grandmother Earth as the root. Everything that's used has to be used totally and completely, like what Micaela was talking about with the buffalo. You use every part, you don't waste anything. Everything has a purpose. And you leave no trace behind, which is not something capitalism or profiteering or organizations have really a whole lot of understanding about. You leave it the way you found it. And so that's a really important part of, you know, environmental justice is about taking care of Grandmother Earth. We only have one grandma. How would you take care of your own grandma, your own two-legged grandma? Would you treat her the way this grandma is being treated? And a lot of the reservations across this entire country, often 40, 50% have no running water. They have no electricity. They have no heat. You know, there's this, and I have to be careful because I don't say his name, but the current person in the White House started uranium mining 2 weeks after he got in on Pine Ridge. And uranium mining on the Diné Res in the 1950s that was never cleaned up. That water is still getting shipped into those people when they run out of water. They start drinking that bad water. Do you know some of those kids are being born right now in 2020 with the Geiger counter registering on their bodies? They're radioactive. People don't know these things are happening. because it never gets out to the mainstream. But the people know it's happening, and the people amongst the people know it's happening. And that's why we began with the Dene, because the spirit said they would be hit first with the pandemic. They'd be the first ones to be hit. It would be double what New York is. And so that's why we started that way first for the last 8 months. So it's important for all of you to understand that you can't separate the indigenous from the land. It's in us. In the Dene culture, where your umbilical cord is buried is where your birthplace is. A part of you is in that earth with grandma. And so we don't know how to exist without being connected to the earth. I don't know how to say that in a different way. Not in our heart, not in our mind, not in ourselves. All of us are connected. So when people say that, for example, we or Renee or Micaela are passionate, it's inside of us. We can't not be passionate. We can feel her pain. And everyone who lives on the reservations has to live with that pain all the time as things are extruded from her body. Not because she's asked for that, but because power and greed asks for that. Capitalism asks for that. And nobody asks. The pipeline that we fought about with Cheyenne River Reservation and Standing Rock started because it was supposed to go through Bismarck, the capital of North Dakota. And they didn't want that. So they figured they would put it through the reservation water and it wouldn't be a big deal because it was only the indigenous people. They had no idea what they were starting and what was setting in motion. And it was just not for the indigenous. It was for the 2 million people whose water in that river downstream were going to get polluted. So for us, this is a big, working with grandma, we've been doing this since we were little. We took a vow very little to protect her. It's why we've been on those roads and why we've traveled so much. So we want to say to you as a relative, because you are all our relatives, and unless we become all relatives, we cannot change what's happening on this planet. We need to all do this together. One mind, one heart, one heartbeat. Aho. Okay, Jessica, it's your turn.
Thank you all for that. That was inspiring, devastating, everything. Something that both Renee and Maria, you talked about was what's happening on the reservations right now through the COVID pandemic. And you mentioned how they're inequitably affected, and part of this has to do with the lack of healthcare services, the lack of social services, the lack of clean water, clean air. And this isn't just a single, this happened all of a sudden in these 8 months. This has been happening due to a historic legacy of exploitation. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the intersection of environmental justice and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic.
Do either of you want to go first? Micaela or Renee?
Renee.
For Colorado and urban spaces, there's been no legitimate healthcare system that takes care prior to this issue, prior to COVID as a pandemic. And on reservations overall, you have to remember those treaties were never honored and people were pushed to those reservations. It's up to the government to provide that source of healthcare and provide that source of livelihood to take care of people there, and they never have, and they never honestly will. And in my opinion, our government treats indigenous communities as cattle. They're never able to own their land. They're never able to own their space. And you're never able to own your resources. You're literally just flushed around on where you are in that space, but nothing is provided for you. So COVID has devastated those spaces. And then you have complications from pollution in those spaces as well, and exploitation, and absolutely no representation in any policy level. So people with respiratory illnesses and circulatory illnesses, which COVID attacks directly, are directly affected, such as our elders and our youth. And our youth have the energy, our elders know the way. These are key people in our communities. that are being affected, that are being devastated. So again, we have no healthcare system to provide for them, and none that has ever been in place prior to this. So there's already been a failed infrastructure for years. There's absolutely none of their resources that are not polluted if you're on a reservation. So that complicates problems. So you have an overlap of inequity. And Colorado alone, you get these false promises of how are we going to help disproportionately impacted communities when you have these failed social infrastructures. And there's never really a framework even here. There's been like a fake attempt by Polis to do the greenhouse gas roadmap. But my concern is that there's no real enforceable policies, again, for these communities that are impacted. There's no trust building where you're actually going there to provide equity analysis. They need money, they need those resources, they need that equity now, they need that land, they need that property, they need all of those resources now. And there's no, I see councils, I see meetings, I see more committees, and I see another thing, but there's never help. So honestly, this is another thing that is swept under the rug of genocide, because there's nobody that really takes care of another pandemic, to another marginalization, to an indigenous community that's already been oppressed. So it's these constant overlaps of the same communities that we are sitting hit. And the best I can do is give food bank. I work for a nonprofit. The best I can do is give social emotional health virtually to our youth. And it's so inadequate because I don't know what's going on in their homes. And the best I can do is sometimes call people on the phone and pray with them when they're feeling down to the point of suicidal ideations because they have so much death around them, and provide them with the best resources I can. And I am just one of so many people in this space. And that's not talking about the houseless issues. That's not talking about all the lack of affordable housing should people want to leave the reservation. And we're in a pandemic, lucky finding a job. So it's a lot of these infrastructures that I'm seeing overlapping on my community again, that we should already know better. And if our policymakers and leaders can't do it, they need to step out of the way and let us do it ourselves, because we know fully well where you're failing. So that's what I have to say about that.
Micaela, want to say anything?
You know, I think that too, with this lack of education has a lot to do with it. As far as like not wanting to provide education to my people on reservation. I want to give an example of how bad it is right now and how we're just not speaking about it at all. On my reservation right now, 1 in 10 people have COVID, including my family. And that is my elders. And I have 2 elders on my Lakota side. And our elders are our treasures. And when I call my father, who lives on the reservation, who has COVID currently, who had COVID and who was really sick, who literally almost lost his life because people don't want to wear a mask. He's literally telling me that, and he says because of due to lack of education, due to just, you know, being stubborn and not listening. Again, here's this thing is that, you know, we don't want to listen to the white man. And with that, it's causing harm to our people more than what this virus is. And then with that too, we have to think about my people that are currently involved with drugs, you know, 3-4 generations down. How can they even think about putting on a mask if they can't even feed themselves or their children? So I just want to put that in perspective on how not only has our people been going through this for generations, they're continuing to go through this during a pandemic, and we don't do anything about it. We don't talk about it. Nobody's asking about my people and how our people are doing. You know, and I, again, it's just, there's that continuous lack of wanting us to continue to fail. They don't want us to succeed. And so with this pandemic, just like my sister Renee said, it's just another way of genocide. Here we are, us three Indigenous women on this call are literally prodigies of genocide. And we're continuing to have to watch it happen right in front of our faces. Thank you.
So we want to talk about a few things. One, the month of November, when they say Native American Heritage Month, do you want to know how many Natives still do not have the right to vote? Didn't have the right to vote in this last election because they have a post office box, because they don't have a street address, because they don't have the quote ID from the government in the way that it needs to be done. You can't imagine how many people, foot soldiers, tried to get people to be able to just have the right to vote, things that everyone else outside of the res takes for granted. If you saw the food that gets shipped into the reservation, when I go home, I've been going home now for the last 8 months, taking trucks filled with food. We created the first mobile library on the reservation with 2,000 donated books so that children can start to read and have their minds opened up. But we can also tell you that IHS, which is Indian Health Services, is run by the Defense Department, not by a medical organization. So there's not good care. When I fell in, cracked my hip in Standing Rock, I knew where not to go for help. I walked on that cracked hip for 10 days in minus 40-degree weather till I could come back to get the right help. But they have no help there. They have good people trying, but they don't have the resources. We've sent over 45,000 surgical masks, over 50,000 face shields, and they're all gone. We can't keep up with the demand and the need. I'm doing ceremonies every other day for people who are passing out there, who need prayers, need a 4-day passage. There are things happening. I'll give you an example where people beat COVID, and the people from UCSF, University of San Francisco, were out helping at IHS. We've had a lot of people come to different places, and they released someone not having the understanding because they were not Indigenous, good-hearted people giving their time, trying to help, but they released people not understanding that there's not even enough ways, that people don't have phones to call someone to come pick them up, that people were dying as they were walking home miles and miles in the heat this past summer after beating COVID. It was only till one was picked up and brought back to the hospital that the doctors even realized that, oh my God, these people have no way to get home. So there are things like that, such basic necessities that are so taken for granted out here, that when you start to talk about environmental justice, it's also about how do we help people who are just trying to figure out how to get food for the next meal. They don't know what a green vegetable looks like. They don't know that. They've been living on commodities and junk food because that's what gets shipped in. You know, we've been working with a couple of organizations trying to get some entrepreneurship going with an organization up in Missouri so that Indigenous people can go and intern and learn hydroponics so that they can become self-sufficient, create their own businesses. But there's not much work on the reservation, which is why there's so much alcohol and drugs, because most of the people who have the land or lease the land on the reservation are not Native. They're not Indigenous, they're white, and they don't hire the Indigenous, especially in Singangu and Rosebud and all those areas over there. The Natives don't get hired. And so it's really important to understand that as much as they respect the earth and they take care of grandma, they're trying every day just to make it through the day, most of them. And so in this pandemic, it's, as Renee said, the depth of the poverty on every reservation is so severe. And then you add the pandemic where they don't have running water, they can't wash their hands. There's no way to keep clean. It's not that they're not clean people. They just don't have the things, the basic things that they need to keep clean, to get their hands washed. If we could tell you how many distilleries we got to send out hand sanitizer, but for 300,000 people, can you imagine how much needs to go out? We've sent 50,000, no, we've sent 50 275-gallon water tanks out to the reservation so that they could just have water to wash hands and to drink into the remote areas where a lot of the elders are in the hogans and where all the elders are spread apart. But no one knows if they're okay or they're not unless they drive many miles. We've been creating boxes of food. So when people are at that level of poverty, whether it's on the reservation or whether it's in urban areas, there's not a feeling of being seen. People feel forgotten. They're not even mentioned. I think Biden mentioned the native population after Arizona helped push him over because of the native indigenous population there. All of a sudden, the Native Americans existed. But we want to honor what Micaela has said and what Renee has said. This is a bigger problem. And environmentalism has not been a separate thing in Indigenous lives. It's a way of life. It's not separate. It's not that they're environmentalists or we're activists. That's just our way of life is about respecting all living beings, all living things. Everything has a purpose. And if you take a life, if you're going to collect sage, you offer something to that plant and you pray for that plant so that for the next 49 generations, the next 7 generations, that plant you never take the roots. You always just take from the top so that that plant can continue to grow seed. You never take the seeds, you let the seeds drop. So it's a way of life. It's a way of understanding how to work with the world. And there's so many people that are incarcerated, BIPOC people that are incarcerated, I mean, the list just kind of goes on and on and on. So I'm going to stop right there so that I know, Jessica, you have more questions.
Yeah. I remember last time we spoke, you also mentioned the idea that a separate environmentalism, that environmental stewardship, as we often think of it in these Western colonialized organizations, is such a privilege, especially during this time of COVID, to even be able to put our minds towards those longer term efforts when basic immediate needs are not being met and basic rights are not being met. And then my next question is a bit of a shift. This is something that Renee, you've been working on a bit, and you've worked on it with 350 Colorado, the link between fossil fuel development and missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit persons. So Indigenous women face murder rates 10 times higher than the national average, and part of this is being driven by the exploitation of Indigenous women living nearby oil and gas or coal extraction sites and other sites where there's exploitation of land and resources. I was hoping that you all would be able to share more about that relationship between extractive industries and even the mindset of extraction and how it relates to missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Thank you. That's again a very weighted subject. I joined learning about missing and murdered Indigenous women when I was pregnant at an I Don't Know More protest. It was actually a campaign started that I saw with red dresses. And the emblem now of that powerful image of a red dress was from a Métis girl from, forgive me for saying it wrong, in Canada. For her family members, I believe she was 10 years old in the forests there to bring awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous women. And at that time, I've grown in Chicano communities and specifically in marches and activism for Cesar Chavez. I've always grown up in activism in one form or another. But my whole life, I've always seen Commerce City, always seen so many spaces of environmental racism, been flushed out of spaces, literally, whether we had to move. My family was also migrant workers, my grandfather was, and understanding how that influenced us and our settling or having to constantly fight to live here in Denver, that I I decided to try to find a link here and support the same narrative. Because if there's extractive industries and if there's predatory capitalism, there's going to be wage theft. There's going to be labor trafficking. There's going to be sex trafficking. And yes, this unfortunately hits Indigenous women and communities hardest, children and men as well. And unfortunately in Colorado, we only have 2 reservations left here, Ute reservations, the Mountain Ute and the Southern Ute, but we have 48 tribes that still travel through here. And Colorado has a lot of extractive industries, this fracking, and even before that, Suncor was built in 1964, and along the roadways, all the trucking stops, all the areas around here are practically our man camps. And if you look in those spaces, they have the same issues of women having issues of domestic violence, stalking, going missing. And if you look at the demographics, they're always the same demographics and race. Indigenous, Chicano, immigrant communities, they're invisible here in Colorado from any real representation and ultimately protection. So here in Colorado, we link that to the predatory extractive industries, such as Suncor and Mike Little, CEO. If you're going to harm our communities and claim your corporations in any form of personhood, then you need to also be moral people in our spaces. And if you're aiding and abetting any criminal behavior, you need to abide by the law and prosecute them. And if you're not, you yourself are a criminal, and you need to give some form of payment or resolution to the communities harmed, again, disproportionately, such as others. So in my opinion, that needs to be a legitimate, constant fund of income and redistribution of wealth from those corporations that also secrete these incredible poisonous gas plumes in our area as well. That I personally think we need to have, since it's been passed now officially under Representative Deb Haaland, the Invisible No More Act, we need to have a collaborative database of all of our law enforcement, but ultimately that has to be for the families' access so that they can have true search and rescue. We need to have legitimate protection federally for women on and off reservations. And we need to have self-defense courses for our youth. If you're not going to protect us, let us find ways to protect ourselves and find free ways to protect ourselves and properties to do it on that are community spaces to do it at. So a lot of these things are interlinked and intermingled in Colorado, and it's very dynamic, but that's because Colorado is one of the oldest cities on this or at least not Colorado, but Denver and Pueblo, one of the oldest cities on this continent that several tribes have traveled through for ages. So 48 tribes are still traveling here. I think we have 75,000 enrolled members in and around Colorado, but over 100,000 that identify as Native affiliated with tribe or just Indigenous in Colorado. That's a significant community that is being impacted with no representation ultimately. So that's why we do the transformative art education that we do initially, but we also want to do it to bring healing to the women that have survived and want to also have a platform. They can use our platform to heal through however they want to. So that's the work that we do locally, and I'd love to expand it to any women, and women with an X, those that identify as life givers that want to help in that space. And I did not find this alone. Micaela and I found Women from the Mountain in order to do this, and it was her inspiration of missing and murdered Indigenous women to do the red dresses down 16th Street that we initially did with 350. So she is the bridge to so many spaces that helps us again with real authentic representation. So I want to shout it out all again to my sister.
Thank you, sister. You said that so beautifully. I just want to add just really fast, any on top of that is just our sisters down at in Mexico, mostly in Ciudad Juarez, who have been going missing and being murdered since I was a young girl. I actually remember doing a story back in high school on our missing and murdered Indigenous women, our sisters down there, without even knowing. I guess I shouldn't say no, because growing up, I heard all the time about our women constantly going missing when I would go to Sundance or when I would go visit my family on the reservation. But this was just a bigger story and something huge that the media was slightly somewhat talking about, right? Because it was happening. It was huge, and there was thousands of women still to this day that continue to go missing due to working at the factories down at the border in Juarez. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Also, in my opinion, detention centers are also a way to be manipulative places of harm of the same perpetual genocide of missing and murdered Indigenous women, because those are refugees. Sorry, I had to throw that in.
The only thing we want to add is that this has been happening forever. This is not something new. It's just now we've finally are getting to a place where we have, and I'm going to say it because it sounds funny, some breathing space to even look at it, to name it. It's not like this is just happening now. It's been always happening, all the way back to the settlers, all the way back. So it's important to understand that longitudinal picture and what happens to a people when they're used to being dismissed, when they're used to being told that they don't matter, when they get used to being told they don't count on any level. How do you teach the self-respect, and how do you teach people to take care of themselves when sometimes for some women the only way they can help their families is by working in the fields, by doing whatever they're doing and trying to feed at the food camps or the man camps or wherever they go, because they want to take care of their families. So we have to understand from a socioeconomic, political, there's so much intertwined here. You can't separate them out. That's all we wanted to add.
Thank you so much, everyone. My next question is going beyond environmental justice, which is more about the focus on justice for humans who are experiencing environmental harms. There's also the concept of ecological justice, which is about justice for the natural world, for the more than human world. For example, through the dominant Western societal lens, when we speak about water security or water justice, we're often talking about clean, accessible water for humans. But through a non-anthropogenic Indigenous worldview, we see water justice as not just clean, accessible water for humans, but also for plants, for animals across multiple generations. And we also see water as a living entity with its own rights, with its own intrinsic worth, with its own purpose and responsibilities of its own, which invokes a sense of connection and responsibility for whether it's water or any other entity. As an example, would you all be able to speak to the role of Indigenous knowledge and practices in caring for Grandmother Earth, as well as the role of Indigenous knowledges and practices in preventing, adapting to, and building resilience to climate change and environmental degradation? Big old questions.
Go ahead, ladies.
Well, first, I think that it's important to say that from an Indigenous perspective, we don't feel that humans are somehow separate from nature. Mm-hmm. No matter how advanced our technology gets, we will always be dependent on our Unchimaka, aka our Mother Earth, for our survival as a species. Our people have a relationship with the earth where we have learned to never take more than we can give back to the earth, like our Dr. Maria Michael said earlier. Therefore, this balance within the earth is what we desperately need. And right now, we just take and take and take, and no thought of the future generations or other life. Thank you.
Thank you, love. I always look at you, just little kid. I can't speak for all tribes. I can only speak as the Chicana that I am, in the space that I grew up in, and the respect I was told to have to the rights of nature that things around me were alive that had just as much right to live as I did. And we have a responsibility to not always impose on those spaces, but we do have a responsibility to, because of our compassion and our strength, to also be stewards of spaces. And we don't do that at all. And to live in a whole world that doesn't teach you that at all, and then to be taught that, it's really conflicting. I personally, I can't speak as any type of spiritual person in that way, but I've just been taught all my life the importance of adhering to your cultural resilience. And that is, I've been blessed to be around my culture to help me through personally. So even right now, I've been blessed to find Spirit of the Sun. I don't, just to correct as well, I don't work for Four Winds, and I've worked with Four Winds a couple times, but I have not been blessed to work directly with Four Winds in that way, and I hope one day too. But I work for Spirit of the Sun, and we teach cultural resiliency because it in of itself is survivorship and life-giving. And that is the point oftentimes of our culture. I'm a danzante. I'm a woman that holds the smoke, a samadora, a popos siwat. And we hold the popos comet, which is the incense burner. And what it teaches you is the importance of cleaning and protecting your space. Sometimes you can only offer a dance, you can only offer a danza, but if you offer it clean and you offer it pure and you offer with all your love, that intention is gonna go further and you're just seeding it. And that is how I've been taught as well, even in this space. That resiliency goes so far. If you can just clean and take care of this space and understand your balance, both in yourself, if you can clean and understand your biosphere around you and your implications and your impact on its right to live, its right to nature just as much as you. And if you understand your stewardship in that space and just hold your fire sacred, just your little fire, you can go a lot further. And that form of resiliency has helped me my entire life. So that's what I've been taught as a life giver, as a mother in that space. And that is replicated often within the spiritual practices I'm taught, the elders, even when we go just to do things outside of gardening, that life-giving over and over of resiliency of, you know what, just take care of the weakest in those spaces that need the most life-giving, because everything else around it will get stronger because of it as well, because we're all so connected. So I would say use forms of your cultural resiliency to understand your indigeneity so that you can understand life-giving, to rematriate your societies and let women lead equally in that space so we can legitimately steward our earth in a responsible and hopefully balanced way going forward. And maybe we can help our future generations in just a little bit of this space that we have in this time. So that's what I've been taught.
And we would like just to echo what Micaela and Renee have spoken about. There is no way to separate ourselves from the rest of all living beings. It's sometimes a hard concept, you know, for people who have not lived their life that way. But we recently had someone who had no place to live and came to live with us. And he said, there's spiders down here. We said, that's okay. Just pick them up. We'll give you a cup. We'll give you a piece of paper. Take them outside. Don't kill them. You can't kill anything in this house. Everybody has a right to live. It's that simple. You know, it's like when our daughter was, she'll not be happy that I say this, but, you know, in our tradition, even the stones are alive. They speak. And so she was in a biology class in middle school, and the teacher was talking about animate and inanimate objects. And she's, you know, she was saying what things were inanimate and animate, and then she was saying that rocks were just things, they weren't alive. And my daughter, not understanding the culture where she was actually in, said, oh no, the tonka, the stones, they speak, because she'd been in ceremony and could hear them speak. And that teacher really humiliated her in front of that class. And then we went to school and had quite a conversation with that teacher. But it's more about that every thing is living and alive. Even what we're creating right now in this circle is a third thing with creation that has its own organic heartbeat with all of us together. That's the concept of indigenous thinking, is that we are all in this. It's like each of us is a stone that gets thrown in the water, and the lily pads all have to move. We are all working in response. We all have an electromagnetic sphere around us. That's why we are able to work at hospitals with doctors, because it's energetic. You may not be able to see it, but it actually exists. You can actually change. The body has its own wisdom, and each four-legged has its own wisdom, and each plant has its own wisdom. There is an organization in Italy called Diamanter where they've figured out how to put electrodes on a plant and actually hear and translate what it's singing. But there are people in the indigenous communities who can actually talk to those plants. They can actually hear them. They know which ones are for medicine, which ones are for this medicine, which one is for this illness. A lot of what has happened with Big Pharma came originally from the land, from herbs, from the wisdom of Grandmother Earth that they then synthesized. It's not as powerful as sometimes the natural herbs. It's different because it comes into the body biochemically different. But all indigenous people know that we are not separate from the standstill nation, you call them the trees, from the plant nation, from the fruit, from anything that is alive, including the stone nation, the Tonka Ayate. And so there's no other way to explain it other than we are all breathing together. Maybe not at the same pace, maybe not at the same speed, maybe not at the same depth, but we are all breathing together. We are all living together. And like Micaela said, you don't take what you don't need. You just take enough sage to purify yourself, or to purify your family, or to purify for a ceremony. You leave the rest for someone else. So there's enough for everyone. And in the Western culture, there is such a feeling of lack and not an understanding that there is unlimited abundance. There really is. And if we could understand that as a whole population, then, for example, what's happening now in the politics between the right wing, where there really is a feeling that if they give up any space and become inclusive, that they're not going to have enough for them. What they don't understand is there's plenty for everyone, but we have to share it. And we, on this right now, in this moment, in this, what is this called, Zoom thing? Yes, we are all privileged. We are all privileged, and we have to own that privilege. And if you're privileged, it is your duty to share. It is your duty to share, because if we don't all take that as a part of our responsibility, we know we're privileged. We have a house. We can go turn on our faucet. We can turn on the light and have electricity. Many of my relatives don't have that. We are privileged. And so if we are privileged, it's our responsibility to share. And that's how the indigenous community works. When that man didn't have any place to go, I said, you're my fire keeper. I know where you can live. It's not a problem. And that happens a lot in the indigenous community. You'll see a lot of people camping out at everybody else's house, and as they're traveling through, they call up someone. I'm not going to make it all the way home where I have to go. Can I stay the night? Can I stay a week? Whatever it is. So I think, we want to just explain that we're all connected at all times with all living beings. So don't kill the mice in your house, please. Just invite them to go outside. They're just trying to get warm, that's all. Okay, Jessica, aho.
I love that you brought up that that mindset of abundance and sharing and community, and it's so needed that we move forward to that mindset. We've been stuck for so many generations in this colonialist, capitalist mindset of scarcity and competition and individualism and these separations between people, and more than human. And this, with that idea of scarcity comes, now I need to impose my own control, my own power, my own needs over others. And even just the concept that we use these very individualistic terms. We use I, you, me, it, rather than us, our, or even I've heard the term kin, talking about whether you're talking about trees, whether you're talking about animals, stones, people. I was hoping that you would be able to share kind of how, you know, a lot of us advocates are very well intentioned, but we're still very largely confined by our colonialist systems of thought. And I was hoping that you'd be able to speak about how changing perspective and a transformative approach to decolonized Indigenous thought can transform activism movements, but also just transform our society as a whole.
I would like to start with that, if that's okay with you, ladies. I would like everyone to notice our pronouns. It's we, us, and all. Or sometimes our kids will call us they, because we have to stop dividing ourselves. We've been saying we when people come for ceremony or they come to talk to us and they say, well, how many people are going to be in the room? And we say, just us, but you know, it's always we. There's your spirit helpers, our spirit helpers. It's all of creation is in the room with us at all times. And if we could stop dividing ourselves into, and I, it has a lot to do with ego. We is collective. And so we always speak in the we. It's confusing for a lot of people, but we've been doing that since we were pretty young, when we were taught that we are all connected, we are all related. Well, if we're all related, we have to speak in the we. If you're all relatives to us, it's important to speak and be mindful of that. And so this colonial white mind think that you talk about, Jessica, has to do with I and ego, and it's about me and where am I going to get and whose back do I have to walk on to get there. You know, the person in the White House right now is a prime example of that. But he is not the only one. He's just such an extreme that you can't, you know, we actually thought it was a blessing once he got in, because he would bring up the ugly belly of the beast, and really we get to see what's really underneath that no one's really been noticing. And so it's really, this pandemic has really been about grandmother trying to teach all of us to come together and help each other, to put aside our separateness, our whatever boxes we put ourselves in, whatever labels we use. Maybe we could just be human beings. And this is not to minimize what's happening to migrant workers, not minimizing what's happening to minorities, not to minimize what's happening to Indigenous, but we have to start to see ourselves as a collective that can help each other and accept each other and accept the wisdom of each other and the ancestral wisdom of each other. It's really important that we start working from that place. So I thought it would be just something to add, because we made sure that we added the pronouns, because we didn't quite understand this concept for quite a long time because it was so foreign to us. So we wanted to just speak to that, because you never stop learning, no matter how old you are. Eh? Okay, ladies.
You want to go, Meek? You want me to go?
Yeah. Whoever wants to go.
know the difference between allies and accomplice. Learn aspects, I'm constantly always saying, of redistribution of wealth and redistribution of narrative. Ultimately, things have been stolen and wealth has been displaced from entire communities, and that needs to be recognized. And historically, we need to recognize that history is really important to relieve these injustices now. But everything needs to be gauged within a historical context, because the social anxieties that we're feeling now, these are generations that people have been living with no access to healthcare, no access to infrastructures. And now we're seeing just how bad it's been. And it's blatantly immoral. And it's gotten to the point that we've survived, and because of survivorship, we should be able to lead in our own communities. And we no longer want a seat at the table, we want our own table. We want an ability to set up our whole own entire infrastructures, and that is key to having property. We need to have property back. In Colorado, it is so hard just to find community spaces for BIPOC. It is so, lack of affordability here is ridiculous. So that just shows you socioeconomically where priorities are, because guess who can't afford it? Gentrifiers. I mean, let's be realistic also. And that does unfortunately coincide with race, because socioeconomically, if you want to talk about gender, guess who's also paid less? And then break it down by race. So these aspects constantly affect our community, and none of them are relayed in the American identity. Nobody's educated on this at all in our systems at all. And by the time we're exposed to it, it's too late to really influence anything yet. And then we end up having to use the rest of our lives, hopefully being able to influence one generation. And that's if it lasts in the local city. And frankly, like I said, I've kind of grown up in these movements. We've had so many of our community spaces close. And now within COVID, we're lucky if we'll have them after this at all. So yes, redistribution of legitimate wealth. An ally might help open that door. An accomplice will give us the ability to just completely go through and give us the platform that was taken from us. So know the difference between allies and accomplices. Most of all, don't fall into spaces of white saviorism. We can save ourselves because we've survived so much of genocide ourselves. So those are key aspects, and they're very uncomfortable. I constantly trigger people with these conversations all the time. Well, you make me ashamed of being white. Well, white only exists in colonized space, and I'm only indigenous because you claimed it out. So we could go for days. But I love having these conversations because I am a teacher, and you can relearn. And I like also learning where I might have issues of colorism, agenda, and bias. So we need to have these conversations, but we need to go past conversations and legitimately do something and be active now, because people are being affected now.
You guys said it perfectly. I don't really have much to add. Maybe just that, you know, it's really important for instance, 350 hiring an Indigenous person. I think that's really important to put us in these spaces, especially when a lot of the time we're not given the resources to work the way we should, right? Maybe the way that, you know, I'm going to give an example. I was given an opportunity to apply for a job here, and they work in the Commerce City and Westminster area, and they're an organization that works, they say that work specifically with Brown or with our BIPOC community, right? And there was just some things that I just wasn't as savvy on, and they just weren't able to like get around that. And I really think that some of us, you know, if you're able to provide us with these opportunities and really give us the time and work with us, just like 350 has with me, you know, that's really huge. And so I just want to say and give and shout out 350 Colorado for stepping up and hiring myself and Amy Gray, because we are Indigenous women from Turtle Island, and especially I'm a woman that was born and raised here in Denver, Colorado, and so it's really important, and that's just one step forward, right? So just want to leave that there.
I would like to add something to that. You know, being on the board is new for me. We were very active in the climate strikes as a spiritual Indigenous leader speaking. And that just came to us because we had been doing it our whole life in California and other states. And so we contacted 350 when we came. And it was because of those talks and because of the youth and because of everything that everyone was doing that they realized, it would be important to have an Indigenous person on the board. And we don't think that's the only reason we're on the board by any stretch, because we have a lot of degrees and a lot of other things, which is sometimes part of why we use the title, because it's important for the youth to know that we can achieve anything we want if we have the support and the belief in ourselves. And I worked 40 hours, we worked 40 hours a week and went to school part-time. There was no handouts, but it's important so that the youth know that the world is open to them, but they can only know that if there is an exposure and they meet people who have been able in some way, and that mentorship happens. Because a lot of time there is no mentorship. We had no mentorship, none. We were one of the first to step out and say, want to learn. So it's important to understand that giving Indigenous people the wherewithal, all you have to do is open the door. They can prove themselves. My niece, she's a hydrologist. She's working on her PhD to try to keep the water clean on the res. It's like, it's possible, but we have to give people the opportunity to know that it's possible. That's why we started the library, to get these kids to understand that there's a bigger world. There's the world of possibilities out there. But if you live in a very small place where there's no possibilities, you can't even think outside the box. And that's where we have to be given the opportunity to think outside the box of where we've been forced to live, so that the children can dream of being an astronaut or can dream of being whatever they want, and to know that it's possible. And this is what every parent wants for their children. But because of the difference in resources, because of the difference in exposure, because of the difference in education, because of the difference in finances, because of the difference in poverty, because of the difference in multi-generational trauma and multi-generational health that's been passed on because of the lack of good health care, because of the lack of good food. If people are starving, they don't have the time or the luxury to pray. They're just trying to figure out how do they feed their family the next meal. We have to give them the luxury of that space to think wider and to help them that way, so that there's a bigger world out there. But they don't know that world is out there. That's why the books are so important on the reservation, so that they get to expand their awareness of the world. So I just wanted to add that piece, because it's an important piece. And we here of privilege, we really need to be mindful of that. Really need to be mindful of that. And how do we share that? How do we help? How do we help? And how dare we not help? Whoever it is that needs
Sorry,
help.
go ahead.
Okay. Whoever it is that needs help. I mean, today we just dropped off 55 pounds of food at our center in Longmont because they're running out of food, because the lines are so long. We didn't care who it went to. We just cared that they would have food to eat. How dare we not give food when we have more than enough? That's what we're talking about here. It's not just about helping our own communities, but there's a bigger picture. And that's what these sisters are talking about. These relatives here are talking about. Not only helping our own, but first we have to help our own so they can stand up, so that they then have the strength to then go out and help others. No hope. Sorry, Jessica, we didn't mean to speak over you.
No, I apologize for speaking over you.
Fine.
I really appreciate all that you all have shared. It all leads perfectly into my last question, which is, besides hiring Indigenous staff, what are some concrete ways that 350 Colorado and 350 Denver in particular can support Indigenous environmental justice and use our privilege to be accomplices, in your words, Renee, to uplift existing Indigenous-led activism and specifically also youth-led Indigenous activism?
You guys kill this one.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so
Go ahead, ladies.
Honestly, again, wealth redistribution. So that does look like equity analysis. We do need BIPOC communities. We need more affordable housing. We need people to legitimately fight for BIPOC to have more affordable housing and land back here in Denver. We need our resources and cost of households advocated for, especially in and around extractive industries. Those that are suffering from the issues of particulate pollution have healthcare supported. A lot of schools in those spaces, even pre-COVID, didn't even have nurses. So being able to have access to legitimate spaces, and BIPOC means Black, Indigenous, people of color. So I'm meaning all those marginalized communities that often find themselves being Chicano, immigrant, Black, Indigenous communities in and around Colorado. And in our data, we just call it, but now it's just called overall BIPOC, because it's always the same communities that are unfortunately disproportionately impacted. So that being said, we need actual properties in and around Colorado to have affordable housing for a houseless community now. And a lot of that is Indigenous communities. We need to have families supported right now during their households costs during COVID. We need to have BIPOC communities also seen as equal in policy levels and have representatives in those policy levels that are in those communities still. Most of all, in my opinion, we need independent monitoring in our communities. We need communities that are already BIPOC and have those strong social infrastructures set, whether they're nonprofit or what have you, supported directly to be able to have access to their own cultural services, their own cultural resiliency services, their own spaces of identity. And a lot of that specifically is being flushed out of Colorado. El Chapultepec was just recently closed. That's where my parents even met. I exist because of that place. So in all honesty, and that's not talking about CHAC, which is our art space. That's not talking about Escuela Tlatelolco, which is a school that was for specifically Chicano communities. And the whole entirety of 5 Points is now being gentrified, which was once the Black community. So all of those community spaces are now being flushed out. It would be incredibly helpful to have accomplices actually help provide us spaces again to reintegrate our own identity back in Colorado, to help the spaces that we know are being marginalized again of affordable housing, of extractive industries, of those spaces. So we need real accomplices now in those spaces like today. Because if we don't, yeah, more places are going to close, and it's small businesses are being impacted. Can you imagine what BIPOC businesses are being impacted right now too? So all of these things are overlapping, and then COVID. That if you are privileged, yes, you need to understand what it means to share your abundance and have redistribution of wealth to truly rebalance the wealth that's been stolen from BIPOC communities. And that would be really key to fixing a lot of our social injustices directly.
I truly don't have anything to add. Dr. Maria Michael, if you would like to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that 350, I'm going to say first a thank you, a shout out to 350, because when we were doing the drives for the water to take out to the res because they had no water, we were doing drives for clothes when we were doing drives and needing money for gas and things like that so that the communities could benefit. They helped donate money from the fundraising that we helped them with, and they gave us money just to be used however it was needed. And so we feel that there's more of that needs to happen from 350 because there's not even period because, but we want to acknowledge that they have done that. We agree with Renee that there needs to be housing, there needs to be services, there needs to be a lot of emotional support. A lot of young people are really having a really hard time. It's hard when you have a mixed identity, when you're biracial and you're caught between many worlds, and one world doesn't completely accept you and another world doesn't completely accept you, but you know where you are in your heart. It's really hard, especially in the urban areas. And so that's something that can be really important for the youth. And one of the things that we want to say in front of everyone that's here before too many people else get off, that these relatives here, these two women, you know, they were very respectful when they said, okay, you're the elder. In our traditions, the elders go first. And I have been asking them to go first because they are our future. Like Crazy Horse said, we did not inherit this land from our ancestors. We inherit this land from our children. It is our job to make sure that the youth have a place to grow. We are borrowing the land from them and their future. And this is the reason why we must honor the youth first. Let them go, let them speak, let them have the space to spread their wings. All we have to do is be the wind beneath their wings so they can take off and fly. It's so important. And yes, eldership is also important. And we thank you both for honoring us in that traditional way, because we're a traditional elder and in many ways and a spiritual leader, but you are the reason. You are the reason. You will help take us forward. And that's also equally as important. And it is important for 350 to understand that, as they did with the Indigenous youth and the climate strikes, that it is the youth that we need to support to lift them up in all the ways that they need lifting: social, emotional, physical, mental, whatever ways that is, so that they can move forward. Just like we work with the environmental group in Niwot because they're fighting Crestone, and they asked us to speak on behalf of fighting Crestone, and some of the comments and the things that some people said were horrifying the adults. And yet these youth still put out the video and they're still fighting. It is our job to lift them up. And so we want to say that to everyone who's on here. Please remember that even if you're an elder, our job is to lift up the youth, because they're going to take it forward. They are going to take it forward. We've all chosen to incarnate at this time together. No accidents. No accidents who's on here. No accidents who's visiting. No accidents who's listening. It's all directed by spirit. But we have to create the opportunities for them. And we have to honor them by letting them go first and sharing their knowledge. Because, you know, when people have asked to work with us and to learn from us, we say, you know, the more we learn, the more we realize what we know we can put on the top of a pin. We realize how little we know, because there's so much to know, and so much to learn. So we're all learning every day. But we need to support the youth. And 350 needs to support the youth as best they can, so that they can take the baton forward and help Unshimaka, help Grandmother Earth in all the ways to fight all the fracking, like at the commissioners meeting, all the youth who spoke at the commissioners meeting, to fight to ban oil and gas and keep it in the ground, to get renewable energy, to even get the elders who've been dependent on oil and gas, to get them the re-education they need so they're not so afraid of lack and not lack of income, but they can actually imagine that they have the capability of relearning something new, something new. No matter how old you are, there's always something exciting and new to learn. Imagine giving that privilege to an older person, giving them a chance to learn something new and expand their horizons. It's all the same circle of life. We're all spokes on a wheel. You know, the wheel can't turn without every spoke. And we all have a different purpose, but one isn't any more important than the other. So we wanted to say that to honor these two women who tried in their way to do it the old way. And grandma over here just turned it around, because you are our future. And we just want to be the wind beneath your wings to help you rise. And that's what 350 needs to do. They need to help the youth rise, like you, Jessica. They need to help it rise. They need to give the resources and the education and the understanding so we can really get these messages out. Oh.
All right, thank you all so much. Before we move on to the question and answer section, I'd love to invite Liz for a quick pitch for donations. We have a campaign going today trying to reach 28,000, and we are almost there, so take it away.
Where is she?
Well, I don't want to interrupt the wonderful thank you and appreciation for this, the speakers in this meeting tonight. To me, it's been very touching, very touching. And I think I invite us because 350, the National 350 has a very great emphasis on empowering youth and different, everybody, inclusiveness, and an action against racism, and to work against racism by inclusion. And so I know Amy Gray has been working a great deal with that, and has brought that very much to 350 Colorado. And so I thank her and want to acknowledge that. And she's also very much been emphasizing the youth. And you know that we have been doing that the last 2 years in Colorado. So we're almost there to reach our goal so that 350 can move forward with the resources. And I myself am going to go online and contribute another $20. And I invite anyone else to do that this evening so that we meet our goal. And all of this is matched already too. So I know that your $20 becomes $40.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. You've done a great job.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very sweet. I'd love to open it up to all of you that are on the call who've been waiting so patiently. If you have any questions, feel free to put an asterisk into the chat, just like this, and I'll go ahead and call on you.
Can we just say something? We are partially sighted, so we can't see any of the chat. So if someone, you'll read them, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because we can't see any of it. The print is too small. Sometimes it happens to an elder, right? But we see other things, so it's not important.
There are more important things to see.
Can't be that there's no questions. Come on. Someone have the courage. Ask a question.
While people are getting their guts, I want to invite you all to tomorrow night. There's a digital rally. I posted it in the chat. It's just above, it got buried, but I could repost it again. There's a proposed pipeline in northern Minnesota, and there's a digital rally tomorrow to oppose it.
Well, I think maybe, you know, in terms of the time frame we're closing, and maybe people feel that, but I'm sure there's no lack of response from the people here, if in putting things in, maybe they want to put something in the chat in terms of the receptivity to your message.
All right, well, if there are no questions, it is pretty late.
There's a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, why did I miss it?
They're just recently. One
Oh.
says, there's comments about Winona the Duke mentioned the pipeline and she's going to be praying. I know she prayed at it recently as well.
She's going to
with
be a pioneer.
elders.
There's going to be a group of them.
And then the second one is, we categorize it as BIPOC, but yet all cultures are different. To be a true accomplice, is there a better way to mention other communities in conversation? I literally in its entirety normally say Black and Indigenous people of color, but that's kind of right now the social justice term because of Black Lives Matter, but Indigenous rights are human rights. And all of these are all specifically crucial narratives to dismantle white supremacy. And I do not want anyone to play oppression politics in any form. All of them have to be crucial at the same time to dismantle. So I personally would still consider saying Black and Indigenous people of color if you're going to go in spaces often, because for now it at least addresses the two larger communities, but people of color also engage, hopefully, and also the immigrant communities impacted, Asian communities impacted, so many people of color communities impacted. So I would stick with that mostly. And can we have a group that discusses land issues and land return? Yeah, that would be a whole other thing though.
I'm like, yeah, we can have that that would be a great discussion. Let's go ahead and put that on our calendars every month because that is not
For real.
discussion.
Colorado was founded alone on 7 treaties that still aren't founded. In Colorado alone, the Ute aren't even allowed to this day, I believe, I can list the treaties for you that found Colorado if you really want me to. And that's how in depth it would have to be to start really understanding what it means to take back property that was stolen and what wealth has been stolen and how redistribution of wealth looks like nowadays. There's so many conversations to keep going with this. So yes, Mika, this would have to be like a constant webinar.
And I mean, Marie, I see you're like, let's do it. And I'm with you with that. So maybe there's a few of us that can get together and maybe start a group and let's start discussing that. I think that's a great way to even start the discussion, right? Is just by creating a small group. So thank you for bringing that up, Marie. Becky, is there a way to be in touch with all of you to continue this conversation? Yeah, if we would like to all drop would we like to do emails? Whatever you're comfortable with. We'll drop it here in the chat.
And we'll be able to save this chat since it's a recorded video. So we'll go in and grab everyone's email.
So do we just say it out loud or do you want us to type it in or what is the best way?
If you could type it in, that would probably be easiest.
Without making a mistake.
And I have your email account, so I could just type it in for you if that's easier for you.
I just can't see if I spelled anything wrong. Well, so my email is, no, that's private.
Thank you, Carla. Carla Respects the Theme said that Denver Public Library wants to rename a couple branches in honor of Cheyenne and Arapaho Nations people. Thank you, that is true. And Carla is an amazing community organizer and contributor and leader and member. So grateful. But yes, and also I believe they're also gonna have a statue of Sand Creek Massacre, I believe now in front of the Capitol, correct? That used to be the Confederate statue. So slowly monikers and statues are changing, but Pueblo still has Columbus.
Yeah, but Pueblo's been
They've been protesting that for 33 weeks.
Yeah, Pueblo's been having a lot of actions and a lot of problems. There've been some, there are people that have done, Raz Gormley and Devin Reynolds have done trainings for nonviolent direct action because they've had so many problems in Pueblo. So people should be aware of that. I put in my contact, but somehow it's staying only privately to Jessica, and I don't know how to change that. So if anyone wants to contact me, you can look under my website, www.drmariamichael.com. And my email is on there, and you can reach us that way. Jessica, you can type in my email so people can have it if they want it. That's one way to reach us.
I think Jessica was so kind to drop your email into the chat. Dr. Maria.
Yeah, somehow it's only going to privately, and I don't know how to get that out.
But she was able to share it with us all.
Okay.
Thank you, Jessica.
Of course. And then Andrew has said that 350 Colorado has a public lands committee. Maybe this is something that we should discuss in this context as well. So that would be a really good fit. They meet
about that a little bit. The Public Lands Committee right now is working on trying to save the public lands from drilling and all the other things that are happening to public lands in Colorado. So right now they're just trying to save the earth. And they're trying really hard to stop drilling, and they're fighting a lot of opposition on the western slope. So first they're trying to save the public land. Does that make sense? Before they can, it's not their land to give away. They're trying to save it from being abused. So I don't know that would be the right place to talk about what we're talking about, right? About creating a land space for the people. I think that has more to do with policy than oil and gas. I don't want to speak over anyone. I just have been very involved in the public land and listening to what they're trying to do. And I know that they're just trying to save it from being abused. That's their biggest focus right now, it's just to save it from all the permits and everything else that's being done. Jessica, I'm going to turn it back to you.
There's a lot of positivity in this chat. Laura says, thank you so much to the panelists for sharing your voices and wisdom. There's also Celestial says, I'm from Missouri and the Sierra Student Coalition. I am so grateful to hear from this panel of Indigenous women, and I'm incredibly touched by this so I can share this with my own community. Deborah says, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and challenges and profound connection to the earth and all beings. I'm an elder and have so much to learn from you all. So thank you all.
And we have a lot to learn from you as well. It's never a one-way street, never. It's always two ways.
Perfect. Well, I think that closes out the night. I hope that everyone had a really special evening. I know that this was really powerful for myself, and I look forward to continued action in this work.
Jessica, may we say something?
Absolutely.
Once you are done, because we opened with a prayer, thanking the spirits, we have to close it with a prayer. So whenever you're ready to finish, I just want to make sure that we aren't disrespectful of the ones that we asked to join us for this, to guide us, all of us, right? So we want to make sure that there's time for that understanding, that when you open with a prayer and ask for help, you have to also thank them for coming and let them go.
Perfect. I would love to hear a prayer.
Or do you feel it is finished?
I feel it is finished, yeah.
Renee, are you finished? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm good. Thank you, loves. I'm very grateful for you.
How about you, Micaela? We're grateful for you as well. How about you, Micaela? Is there anything else you'd like to add? You have the whole the whole time to add whatever is in your heart, both of you. You know, take the space. You are the future.
I just want to say thank you all for taking the time to call, even for those of you that may not be feeling well this evening or may not, be going through the best. And the fact that you took the time to join us this evening to listen to us really means a lot to the three of us. So thank you so much for doing your part by joining us. And I look forward to those of you that have reached out to do continued work. I really look forward to working with you. And for those of you that had asked me to reach out, I will definitely reach out to each and one of you. I pray for all of you and hope that you all have a gentle evening. Bless you all.
And ladies, we are here for you. You can find out, you know how to reach us. Yeah? To support
I
you.
guess if I wanted to do a plug real quick, then for Spirit of the Sun, look up our cultural resiliency programs.
Go ahead.
We do a lot of programs with the youth, and we try to bridge that elder knowledge in a good way and still respect our own cultures, what we hold sacred to, but in a good way to still help future generations. So if you want to, please look up Spirit of the Sun. We do fun stuff and constantly need support and awareness for the types of environmental justice and social justice issues that we do. My sister and I also do, and my comadre also do Women from the Mountain. That's women with an X from the mountain, and our I Still Exist panel, which specifically highlights the missing and murdered Indigenous women issues here with extractive industries. We were featured at Arvada Center and at East Window, and on Streetwise on Boulder as well. So we were trying to help also get out more other Indigenous women. If you want to exhibit your art in our space, I would love to open it to you as well for that healing. Yes, and Mika is showing her I Still Exist. That is her art, of her made sweatshirt that we made for our campaign, that yes, we're still here. We're not something else. We still exist in our spaces and we plan on staying here. This is our land and we're not going anywhere. So that being said, Tlazokamati Ometo, Tlazokamati Tatonati, Tlazokamati Tonantinklali, Tlazokamati Abuelitos y Abuelitas, and all the ones that came before and all the little ones to come. Thank you, Creator, for today. I pray all of you are gentle with yourselves. Thank you for your support, and truly jump from being an ally to an accomplice, because now's the time to maintain this movement that we're all feeling. So thank you for this opportunity to discuss these important issues. And I hope that many more people way better than me can come in these spaces to continue these and hold this sacred movement. So thank you.
Aho. Anything else you want to say, Micaela? Okay. Jessica, anything you'd like to say?
No, just thank you so much, Renee. Thank you so much, Micaela. Thank you so much, Maria. You were you made such a huge impact on my own life, as well as I'm sure all of the folks that are sitting in the Zoom room with us today. Look forward to hearing your prayer.
This prayer shawl has heard thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of prayers. It's even been burnt by a cedar can, but I'm still keeping it because it's so alive. Donkashila, grandfathers, Unshi, grandmothers, Unshi Maka, grandmother earth, Mini Wichoni, sacred water. We pray for all the elements, air and light. We pray for all the ones that swim in the water. We pray for all the winged ones. We pray for all the creepy crawlers. We pray for all the four-leggeds. We pray for all the two-leggeds. We pray for all the standstill nation. We pray for all the plant nations. We pray for all the Tonka Ayate, the stone nation. We pray for all the Petawaka, all the sacred fires that burn on all the altars, as well as the sacred fires that burn within our spirits, that connect us to creation at all times. We say, Wopelatanka, thank you so much for this opportunity to spend this time together with all our relatives here. We thank you so much for giving us the words, the thoughts, the hearts, and the sharing of the hearts that is so needed, not only now because of the pandemic, but because now we need to change this paradigm. We need to come from a place of peace and prayer and love. We ask special prayers on this night because it's getting cold and the snow will be coming. We ask that you help those right now who are homeless. Many of them are veterans. In our tradition, they are warriors. Many of them are suffering from PTSD. Please help those who are homeless on this night find a place to be warm when the time gets that it's cold. Help all of those who are homeless, who do not have enough food and water and don't have shelter. Help us help find ways to give them food and shelter and warmth. Help us, Unshi, grandmothers and Tonkashila, grandfathers, we ask for special prayers for everyone who listened here with their heart, that they will, like a stone in the water, let this ripple through their bodies, through their cells, so that they can take whatever touched them and share it with another. Help us all remember that we are here, even in the slightest way, to share a smile with someone. We may be the only one who will have smiled with them on that day. Use us. Help us learn how to be in service. Help us learn how to help each other. Help us learn how to make the circle of life continue. Help us learn how to support it and surrender to what needs to happen, as opposed to using our will and making it happen. Help us to create the organicity that's needed so that we can co-create with you, Unshi, grandmothers, Tonkashila, grandfathers. Help us work with the sun and the moon. Help us work with all of you so that we can collaborate and co-create what's needed on this planet, so that the water can be clean, so that all living beings can breathe clean air, so all living beings can be fed, so all living beings don't have to hurt, so that we can all help this climate change, so no more standstill people have to cry from the burning of their skin. Help us to create the changes that are needed so that we as a group can remember how we are meant to be on this planet, that we are stewards, that we are the wisdom keepers, that we are the caretakers of Unshimaka, of Grandmother Earth, all together. Help us to remember. Help us to remember that even though there is technology, that there is a way to be closer to the earth, and there is a way to be in communion. And we ask on this day for everyone everywhere on this planet, that you'll bless each and every step that they take on the back of Grandmother Earth, that they take that walk with reverence, with respect, with integrity, and with honesty. And that where there is dishonesty, where there is no integrity, where there is no respect, we ask that you help each and every one of us to root that out so that we may be their caretakers and can speak and be the rainbow warriors that are in the prophecies for Grandmother Earth, so that we can go ahead and help stop the things that are hurting her so much. Help us to create these changes. Help us to help change each other. Help us first to change ourselves. Let us look within ourselves and see where we need, where we are blocked, so that we can then help another with an outstretched hand. And then another hand stretches out and another hand stretches out till we're stretched out hands, one heartbeat all the way around the whole world. Help us remember that we are all one sacred family of living beings, and that without you, we are nothing. Help us to always remember that you are with us in every way, with every breath. We are connected. And when our mind plays tricks, help us go back to that breath and our heartbeat. Help us remember what's really important. Help us remember what's really important. Help us remember what's really important. We say Wopila Tanka Tonkashla, and we ask special prayers for each and every person on this night, that they may have a good sleep, and that you will bless each and every one on this, in this meeting, and those who might listen to it in the future, that you will bless them with another day of a good life, where they get to wake up in the morning and say, wow, I have another day. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to serve? How am I going to help? How am I going to be on this day? How can I pass creation's love, Wakatanka, great mysteries love, onto the next being who comes across me? How do I pass on that smile, that love, that peace, and that prayer to that next person so that they can pass it on forward that way? So it goes all the way around the world and keeps going, so that every living being is touched with that depth of gratitude, that depth of integrity, that depth of respect, that depth of love, and that depth of acceptance, complete and inclusive acceptance, that no one is above anyone else, and that there is a higher order of love that rules the land, all the land and all the people and all living beings. Help us to remember that. Aho Tonkashla Unshi, grandfathers, grandmothers, Wapilatanka, many thanks. Mitakyo Ase, we are all related. Aho. Okay, Jessica.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. I hope to keep in touch. Please feel free to email me or email any of our panelists today for continued collaboration and discussion and learning and growing. And I look forward to next month's meeting as well.
Aho. Have a blessed